Known as Africa's boldest leader, when Ibrahim Traoré stepped before the microphone, no one thought his words would create an earthquake effect in the Kremlin. But that day, Traoré didn't just speak, he opened a new page in world politics. Vladimir Putin's face froze when he received the news. In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, the sun was shining mercilessly as usual. Ibrahim Traoré was preparing for an international press conference held in the gardens of his palace. This press conference was actually routine. It would announce the achievements of Traoré's self-sufficient Burkina Faso project over the last 6 months. Traoré was reviewing final notes with his assistant Marie before the meeting. "Is everything ready, Marie?" asked Traoré, adjusting the collar of his uniform. Marie nodded. "Yes, Mr. President. All international media representatives are here. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera. And yes, Russia Today, too." Traoré frowned slightly at the mention of the last name. He had been receiving disturbing reports about the Wagner Group's activities in Africa lately. Russian mercenaries were treating civilians ruthlessly in neighboring Mali. And now, according to rumors, this group had set its sights on Burkina Faso's rich gold mines as well. "Mr. President," said Marie, noticing Traoré's thoughtful expression, "are you all right?" Traoré took a deep breath. "Yes, Marie, I was just thinking about some things." At the hour of the press conference, Traoré approached the microphone. Before him sat journalists from every corner of the world. All were eager to hear the words of this young leader who had become Africa's rising star over the past year. Traoré began speaking with his usual calm and determined manner. He talked about the achievements of the self-sufficient Burkina Faso project: increased agricultural production, new water wells, solar energy systems. He presented data, showed graphs. Everything was as planned. And then the question and answer session began. The BBC reporter asked the first question, "Mr. President, how is the project being financed? Is such a big change possible without international aid?" Traoré smiled. "Yes, it's possible, because we're using our own resources. Burkina Faso is a country rich in natural resources: gold, copper, manganese. For years, foreign companies extracting these resources took most of the profits back to their own countries. We've changed this balance. Now at least 60% of the resources benefit the people of Burkina Faso." The Al Jazeera reporter directed the second question. "You've been subject to criticism from Western powers lately. Even Trump characterized your policies as a disaster. What's your response to this?" Traoré responded calmly. "I invited Trump to Burkina Faso. He came, he saw, and he changed his mind. I'm not against criticism, but this criticism should be based on facts." And then the Russia Today reporter took the floor. "Mr. President, what do you think about possible cooperation with Russia? The Wagner Group is helping many countries in Africa with security issues. Is Burkina Faso considering such assistance as well?" There was silence in the hall. Traoré's expression changed. His usually calm and diplomatic tone suddenly hardened. "The Wagner Group," he said with evident anger in his voice. "They are mercenaries, and we know very well what they've been doing in our neighbor Mali. Crimes against civilians, burning villages, killing innocent people. These are not security assistance. This is occupation." The Russia Today reporter couldn't hide his surprise. "But Mr. President, these allegations—" Traoré cut off the reporter. "Not allegations, facts. And let me say this clearly. The Wagner Group or any other Russian mercenary group will never enter Burkina Faso. We can ensure our own security." The reporter went on the defensive. "But Russia approaches African countries as equal partners. It doesn't impose conditions like Western powers." Traoré's eyes narrowed. "Equal partners? Ask Mali how equal they feel. Ask the Central African Republic who controls their natural resources. No, this is a new form of colonialism, and Burkina Faso will not accept any colonialism. Not from the West, not from the East." A shock wave spread through the hall. Journalists were rapidly taking notes. Cameras were recording. Traoré was known for his measured and diplomatic language. But today he wasn't mincing his words. "And one more thing," Traoré continued, fixing his eyes directly on the camera. "I have a message for Mr. Putin. Burkina Faso is not for sale. Our gold, our copper, our manganese. These belong to the people of Burkina Faso. We don't want your Wagner, your mercenaries, your security experts here. We will determine our own destiny. Marie was looking at Traoré with concern from the side of the stage. This unexpected outburst could lead to a diplomatic crisis. But the determination in Traoré's eyes showed that he was aware of this risk. When the press conference ended, the international media had already made their headlines. Traoré challenges Putin. Burkina Faso says no to Russian influence. Africa's brave leader stands up to the Kremlin. Returning to his palace, Traoré was met with worried looks from his cabinet members. "Mr. President," said Foreign Minister Ouedraogo, with evident concern in his voice, This was a very risky move. Russia is a powerful country and has a wide sphere of influence in Africa." Traoré calmly took off his jacket and sat at his desk. "I know, my friend, but sometimes remaining silent is a greater risk. We've seen what Wagner has done in Mali. We cannot allow the same thing to happen in Burkina Faso." "But now you could be Putin's target," said Defense Minister Kabor with concern. "Russian intelligence." Traoré nodded. "Maybe, but our people know that we are fighting for their interests, and this is our strongest shield." When the meeting ended, Traoré stood at his window, watching the setting sun. He knew there would be consequences for what he had said, but he had to take this risk to put Burkina Faso's destiny in its own hands. In Moscow, behind the thick walls of the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin angrily pounded his desk. On the screen, he was watching a replay of Traoré's speech. This is unacceptable," said Putin to his advisor standing beside him. "Who does this young officer think he is? How dare he challenge us?" Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke cautiously. "President Putin, perhaps we should evaluate this situation when we've calmed down a bit. Burkina Faso, strategically, Putin cut him off, his voice icy. "Traoré has humiliated us in front of the world, and now all African countries are looking at him. This is not just about Burkina Faso, this is about Russia's presence in Africa." Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu joined in. "We could take some measures, Wagner's capabilities." Putin silenced him with a raised hand. "No, direct intervention is not appropriate at this moment. First, we should talk with our other allies in the region, Mali, Central Africa. We should isolate Burkina Faso." Lavrov nodded. "And perhaps we could make contact with some internal elements in Burkina Faso. Every government has its opponents." Putin thoughtfully nodded his head. "Yes, this could be a better strategy. Instead of targeting Traoré directly, we should weaken him from within." When the meeting ended, Putin approached the window, looking at the snowy landscape of Moscow. Traoré's words had deeply disturbed him. How had this young African leader found the courage to challenge his authority? But one thing was certain. Putin would not leave this challenge unanswered. Burkina Faso would soon feel Russia's power. A week later, in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, Traoré was in the security room of his palace. Around him were his most trusted generals and intelligence officials. "What are the latest reports?" asked Traoré, looking at the documents on the table. General Ouedraogo responded with seriousness. "There's a noticeable increase in Russian activity, Mr. President. We've detected movements of Wagner elements at our borders, especially at the Mali border." "And inside?" asked Traoré, narrowing his eyes. Intelligence Chief Diallo looked worried. "There are some disturbing signs. We've detected Russian agents in contact with supporters of the old regime, and also with some high-ranking officers." Traoré took a deep breath. This was what he had expected. Instead of a direct confrontation, Putin would try to weaken him from within. "I need names," said Traoré with a definitive voice. "Who are they in contact with?" Diallo extended a file. "Here's the list, Mr. President, but some names might surprise you." Traoré opened the file and read the names. The expression on his face gradually changed. On the list was one of his most trusted men, Colonel Jean-Baptiste Zongo, a childhood friend, a comrade in arms, one of the heroes of the revolution. "This is hard to believe," Traoré murmured, shocked. "We have definitive evidence, Mr. President," said Diallo with a sad voice. "Zongo has been meeting regularly with Russian agents for the last 2 months. And at the last meeting, he received a large sum of money. Traoré leaned on the table, closing his eyes. This felt like a personal blow. Zongo wasn't just a colleague, he was like a brother. They had grown up together, fought together. "What are we going to do, Mr. President?" asked General Ouedraogo with concern. Traoré opened his eyes, a determined expression on his face. "Justice, but in an open and transparent way. Arrest Zongo, but don't leak any information to the media. First, I want to talk to him." At midnight in the military prison of Ouagadougou, Traoré entered a cell alone. In the corner of the cell, Colonel Zongo was sitting, his head bowed. "Jean," said Traoré, with both anger and sadness in his voice. "Why?" Zongo raised his head, shame in his eyes. "Ibrahim, I just thought of what was best for our country. The Russians offered us a real partnership. Weapons, training, money." "And in return," asked Traoré, without raising his voice. Zongo averted his gaze. "Just some mining rights and a military base, a small base in the north." Traoré nodded. "And to overthrow me and take my place. Isn't that right?" Zongo didn't answer, but this silence explained everything. "Jean," said Traoré, approaching his friend, "we made a revolution to free this country from foreign powers. We fought against colonialism, and now you want to open the doors to a new colonizer." "But Ibrahim," said Zongo, going on the defensive, "the West isn't helping us. America, France, they've all turned their backs on us. Russia, at least, is offering something." "At what cost?" asked Traoré sternly. "Our freedom? Our dignity? The blood of our people? Look at Mali, Jean. See what's happening there. Wagner is burning villages, killing civilians under the name of protection. And all this just for gold and diamond mines." Zongo bowed his head in guilt. I was just looking for a way out. Our country's problems are so big." "And the solution is to become a puppet of a foreign power?" asked Traoré with disappointment. "Jean, we grew up together. We fought together. How could you betray me, betray our people?" Zongo couldn't hold back his tears. "I'm sorry, Ibrahim. I'm truly sorry. I was wrong." Traoré remained silent for a while. Then he took a deep breath. "Tomorrow a military court will be established. You will be tried for your crimes. It will be a fair trial, I promise. But know this, our personal friendship cannot stand in the way of justice." As he left the cell, Traoré's heart was heavy, but he was determined. Burkina Faso's independence was more important than any personal bond. The next morning, Burkina Faso state television announced the shocking news. Colonel Jean-Baptiste Zongo had been arrested on charges of treason. He was accused of collaborating with Russian agents, accepting bribes, and making plans to overthrow the government. The news had a bombshell effect in the country. Zongo was one of the heroes of the revolution, but the evidence was clear. Bank accounts, records of secret meetings, correspondence with Russian agents. Traoré appeared on television to address the people. His face was serious but determined. "Dear people of Burkina Faso," he said, looking directly at the camera, "today, with a heavy heart, I must announce a case of treason against our country. Colonel Zongo, once a friend I trusted, a comrade in arms, tried to sell our country's sovereignty by collaborating with foreign powers." Traoré showed the documents in his hand. "These are the evidence of meetings with Russian agents. These are the bank records of the money Zongo received. And these are the plans to overthrow our country." Then Traoré's voice strengthened. "But I want to say this clearly. Burkina Faso will not be a puppet of any foreign power. Not the West, not the East. We will determine our own destiny." Traoré continued to address Putin directly. "And I have another message for Mr. Putin. Your agents have failed. The traitors among us have been caught. But you never understood the power of our people. We are a nation that fights for our freedom, and no foreign power can take this freedom from us." Traoré's speech received great support across the country. In the streets, people organized spontaneous demonstrations, chanting slogans like "Independent Burkina Faso," "No to Putin," Traoré, leader of the people. In Moscow, deep in the Kremlin, Putin was angrily tearing up a report. "How is this possible?" he shouted at his advisors. "How can such a simple operation fail?" Intelligence Chief Narishkin looked nervous. President Putin, we couldn't anticipate Burkina Faso intelligence would be this effective. And Traoré is more popular than we expected. The people really support him. Putin was pacing restlessly around his desk. This is unacceptable. Traoré has humiliated us in front of the world. Twice. First at that press conference, now with this. This deserves a response. Lavrov spoke cautiously. Direct intervention could be risky, President Putin. International reaction, ... International reaction? Putin cut him off, his eyes flashing with anger. What did we do in Ukraine, in Syria? The world reacted, then forgot. The same will happen here. Shoigu looked thoughtful. We could use the Wagner elements in Mali. They could arrange a border incident. We could provoke Burkina Faso and draw them into a conflict. Putin nodded. Yes, this is a good plan. We can't target Traoré directly, but we can weaken him. A border conflict, economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation. Burkina Faso is a small country. It can't withstand. When the meeting ended, Putin again approached the window. Outside, the lights of Moscow were shining. But in his mind, a plan of revenge was taking shape in the distant lands of Africa. A month later, at the Burkina Faso-Mali border, a series of suspicious incidents began to occur. Armed groups coming from Mali were attacking Burkina Faso villages, killing civilians, then quickly withdrawing. These attacks seemed designed to provoke the Burkina Faso army. Traoré held an emergency security meeting at his palace. "What's the latest situation?" he asked, looking at the map. General Ouedraogo responded with seriousness. "In the last week, there have been attacks on 3 villages, Mr. President. A total of 27 civilians lost their lives. The attackers carry the Mali flag, but according to intelligence reports, these are Wagner elements." "What's their purpose?" asked Traoré thoughtfully. "To provoke us into a counterattack," said Intelligence Chief Diallo. "If we enter Mali territory and conduct a military operation, they can portray us as the aggressor. They can damage our image in front of the international community." Traoré took a deep breath. "So a trap?" "Yes, Mr. President," said Ouedraogo. "And unfortunately, a very well-prepared trap. If we do nothing, it means we can't protect our own people. If we do something, we might cause an international crisis." Traoré thought for a moment. Then he spoke with determination. "There's a third option: diplomacy." The ministers looked at each other in surprise. "Diplomacy, Mr. President?" asked Foreign Minister Ouedraogo with doubt. "Mali is under Russian influence. Diplomatic channels?" "I'm not talking about talking to the Mali government," said Traoré, with a sparkle in his eyes. "We will speak directly to the world." The next day, Traoré made an unexpected move. He invited the international press to the villages that had been attacked. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, all were given the opportunity to see with their own eyes what was happening at the border. Traoré personally accompanied the journalists, destroyed houses, killed civilians, testimonies of survivors. He showed everything to the world. A CNN reporter asked Traoré during a live broadcast, "Mr. President, who do you hold responsible for these attacks?" Traoré looked directly at the camera. "The evidence is clear. Those carrying out these attacks are mercenaries of the Wagner Group, and behind them is Russia. Mr. Putin wants to drag us into a conflict by killing our people, but we will not fall into this trap." A BBC reporter directed another question. "What will you do? Will you launch a counterattack?" Traoré responded with determination. "No. We are a peaceful nation, but we will also defend our right to protect ourselves. Today we will file an official complaint with the United Nations. We call on the international community to act to stop these attacks." An Al Jazeera reporter asked curiously, "Do you have a message for Mr. Putin?" Traoré thought for a moment. Then with a determined expression in his eyes, he spoke. "Yes, Mr. Putin, you cannot intimidate us by killing our people. Burkina Faso may be a small country, but we have our dignity, and this dignity is strong enough not to bow to the threats of any superpower." Traoré's bold stance resonated widely in the world media. Africa's brave leader challenges Putin. Traoré unmasks Wagner. Burkina Faso exposes Russia's secret war. Messages of support for Burkina Faso began to come from the international community. The United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting. Human rights organizations called for an investigation into Wagner's presence in Mali. In Moscow, behind the cold walls of the Kremlin, Putin was fuming with rage. On the screen, he was watching Traoré's interview with the world media. This, this is unacceptable, he shouted, pounding his desk. How dare this young officer challenge us? Once again, he has humiliated us in front of the world. Foreign Minister Lavrov spoke cautiously. President Putin, the situation is critical. At the United Nations, Western powers are siding with Burkina Faso. Even China, ... China? Asked Putin with surprise. Yes, said Lavrov with a sad voice. China signed important mining agreements with Burkina Faso last month. And now, in the Security Council, they are supporting an investigation into foreign mercenaries in Mali. Putin collapsed into his chair. This was a development he hadn't accounted for. Without China's support, it would be harder to veto any resolution at the United Nations. And the Mali government? Asked Putin hopefully. Lavrov shook his head. They're under pressure. The international media is questioning the Wagner presence in Mali. Human rights organizations are investigating allegations of genocide. The president of Mali is asking us for an explanation. Putin took a deep breath. So, Traoré won. For now, said Defense Minister Shoigu with cautious optimism. But this is just one battle. The war continues. Putin thoughtfully nodded his head. Yes, you're right. We're retreating, but not defeated. We need to reassess our strategy in Africa. Perhaps we should leave Burkina Faso alone for now. We should focus on other countries. We need to prevent Traoré's influence from spreading. The same day in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood on the balcony of his palace, watching the city. In the streets, people were celebrating. The Burkina Faso flag was waving everywhere. Marie approached him. Mr. President, the news is excellent. The United Nations has agreed to send observers to the Mali border. The attacks have stopped, and the world media is describing you as Africa's new brave voice. Traoré smiled slightly. This is a victory, Marie, but we haven't won the war yet. Putin will retreat, but he won't give up. He will change his plan, try another strategy. What will we do, Mr. President? Asked Marie curiously. Traoré spoke with a determined expression. We will continue on our path. We will strengthen our self-sufficient Burkina Faso project. We will increase our cooperation with other African countries. And most importantly, we will continue to earn the trust of our people, because real power lies in the people's support. Marie respectfully bowed her head. And Colonel Zongo? What will happen to his case? Traoré's face became serious. Justice will follow its own path. Zongo will be tried for treason, but it will be a fair trial, and whatever his punishment may be, it will not be personal revenge, but the requirement of justice. A week later, Colonel Zongo's trial began. The whole world was watching this trial. The evidence was clear: bank accounts, records of secret meetings, correspondence with Russian agents. The military court found Zongo guilty of treason. His sentence would be life imprisonment. But Traoré did something unexpected. After the court's decision, he appeared on television and announced that he had reduced Zongo's sentence to 20 years. Justice should not be confused with revenge, said Traoré, addressing the nation. Colonel Zongo committed a great crime, but at the same time he served this country. He was one of the heroes of our revolution, and I cannot completely forget his services. This gesture once again demonstrated Traoré's understanding of leadership. He was not only strong but also merciful. 3 months later, a grand ceremony was held in Burkina Faso. The African Union Summit was gathering in Ouagadougou. This was a great diplomatic victory for Traoré. Africa's most powerful leaders were coming together under his hosting. In his opening speech, Traoré shared a bold vision: self-sufficient Africa. My dear brothers, he said, addressing all African leaders, for centuries our continent has been subject to intervention by foreign powers. Colonialism, neocolonialism, economic dependency. But now it's time for us to determine our own destiny. A strong applause broke out in the hall. In Burkina Faso, we launched the Self-Sufficient Burkina Faso project. And we're beginning to see the first results of this project. Our agricultural production has increased. We've developed our water resources. We've established renewable energy systems. And most importantly, we've rebuilt our people's dignity and self-confidence. Traoré turned to the other leaders. Now, I invite you to share the same vision. Self-sufficient Africa. As a continent, we can manage our own resources ourselves. We can find our own solutions to our own problems. And most importantly, we can maintain our own dignity. At the end of the summit, a historic agreement was signed, African Resources Initiative. This agreement envisioned African countries jointly managing their natural resources, sharing technology, and economic cooperation. Traoré was emerging as the architect of this agreement, as a new leading voice for Africa. In Moscow, in the dark corridors of the Kremlin, Putin was reading a report, African Resources Initiative and its effects on Russia's interests. The report was clear. The movement started by Traoré was seriously threatening Russia's influence in Africa. Especially Russian companies in the mining and energy sectors would be adversely affected by the new agreement. Putin put the report on the table, thoughtfully approached the window. Moscow's horizon was illuminated with the last rays of the sun. Perhaps, thought Putin, we misjudged Traoré. He is not just the leader of a small African country. He is the pioneer of a new African vision. Putin looked out the window a while longer. Then he called his assistant. Call Sergei. We need to send a representative to Burkina Faso. Perhaps it's time to talk directly with Traoré. A week later, in Ouagadougou, Traoré was hosting an important guest in his office, Russia's special representative for Africa. I bring President Putin's greetings, Mr. President, said the Russian representative in an official voice. President Putin wants to establish a direct dialogue with you. Traoré nodded with cold courtesy. I acknowledge President Putin's greetings. But I wonder, what is the purpose of this dialogue? We've seen Russia's actions against Burkina Faso in recent months. The Russian representative looked uncomfortable. Mr. President, we apologize for the past misunderstandings. President Putin wants to re-establish relations with Burkina Faso on the basis of respect and equality. Traoré carefully examined the Russian representative. Respect and equality. Beautiful words, but things we want to see in actions. Of course, said the Russian representative, nodding his head. President Putin is ready to take concrete steps, reducing tension at the Mali border, exploring opportunities for economic cooperation, maybe developing joint projects. Traoré thoughtfully drummed his fingers on the table. I have a message for President Putin. If he truly wants to establish a relationship based on respect and equality, he should first withdraw the Wagner Group from Africa. He should apologize for the crimes committed against civilians in Mali. And most importantly, he should stop interfering in the internal affairs of African countries. The Russian representative hesitated for a moment. These are quite difficult demands, Mr. President. Traoré smiled, but there was a coldness in his eyes. Difficult? No, Mr. Representative. These are the basic requirements of respect and equality. If President Putin truly wants to establish an equal relationship, he won't find it difficult to accept these demands. A month later, world media announced surprising news. Russia was withdrawing the Wagner Group from Mali. According to the official statement, this was being done to reduce tension in the region and support peace. But the reality was more complex. Putin had made a strategy change against the African countries uniting under Traoré's leadership. He was preferring dialogue over direct confrontation, at least for now. In Ouagadougou, Traoré stood on the balcony of his palace, watching the city. Marie came to him with a newspaper in her hand. Mr. President, she said excitedly, have you seen this? The New York Times published an editorial about you. Africa's new voice, Ibrahim Traoré, and the self-sufficient Africa vision. Traoré took the newspaper and read the headline. He smiled slightly. Interesting. A year ago, they didn't even know me. Now, I've become Africa's new voice. And they're right, Mr. President, said Marie proudly. You're changing not just Burkina Faso, but all of Africa. Traoré thoughtfully nodded his head. Not me, Marie, United States. Our people, their courage, their determination, their dignity, that's what's creating real change. Marie respectfully bowed her head. What about Putin? How did you make him back down? Traoré looked into the distance. Putin is a strong man, but like every strong man, he has to hide his weaknesses, and his biggest fear is losing control. We didn't challenge him directly. Instead, we drew world public opinion to our side, and this is what he hates most, being isolated. So, have we won? Asked Marie hopefully. Traoré responded with a serious expression. This is a chess game, Marie, and we've just made one move. Putin has retreated, but he hasn't given up. He will develop a new strategy, and we must be ready. But this time we're not alone, said Marie, smiling. Traoré nodded. Yes, we're not alone. Now all of Africa is with us, and this is our strongest shield. In Moscow, Putin sat in his private study, looking at a chessboard. On the board, two pawns faced each other, black and white. Putin picked up the white pawn, examining it thoughtfully. Traoré, he murmured, you are an interesting opponent. You won this round, but the game continues. He put the white pawn back and advanced the black pawn. On the chessboard, a new strategy was taking shape. Outside, Moscow's snowy streets were silent, but this silence was like the silence before a storm. Putin would not forget his defeat in Africa, and one day he would challenge Traoré again. But for that day, Burkina Faso had won. A small African country had stood against one of the world's most powerful leaders and prevailed, and Ibrahim Traoré had become a beacon of hope, not just for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa. The sunset in Ouagadougou was more beautiful than ever. The crimson sky seemed to be celebrating Burkina Faso's victory. Traoré stood on the balcony of his palace, watching this magnificent view. Beside him was a young journalist. She had come from the New York Times to do an exclusive interview with Traoré. Mr. President, said the journalist curiously, what did you feel when you first learned of Putin's reaction to your statements on live TV? Were you afraid? Traoré thought for a moment. Then he answered sincerely, fear? Yes, a little. Putin is one of the world's most powerful leaders. Burkina Faso is a small country. But you know, sometimes in life, the greatest courage is doing what's right despite fear. Why did you take the risk? Asked the journalist, taking notes. Traoré looked into the distance. Because my people's dignity was more important than my personal safety. And because I knew that if we bowed, all of Africa would bow. And this was unacceptable. The journalist looked impressed. One last question, Mr. President. Do you have a message for Putin? Traoré smiled. Yes. What I want to say to Mr. Putin is this. Africa is no longer the old Africa. We are defending our right to determine our own destiny, and we will never give up this right. If you want a real partnership, treat us as equals. If you want to rule over us, you will meet resistance. When the interview ended, the sun had completely set, but the lights of Ouagadougou were shining in the darkness of the night, just like Traoré's vision was shining all over Africa. And that night, the people of Burkina Faso slept with the pride of having a leader who defended their dignity. A leader who had stood against one of the world's most powerful men and won. Ibrahim Traoré had frozen for a moment at Putin's words, but then with his courage and determination, he had changed the destiny of not just a country, but a continent. And this was the essence of true leadership, to be afraid, but to overcome fear and do what is right for your people.